Alana Rivers was used to being the only black girl in the room. She'd learned early on how to move through white spaces without making noise, how to shrink herself just enough to be tolerated, but not enough to disappear completely. Briarwood High was just another stop in a long list of schools that never felt like home. She didn't plan to make friends or start over. She only wanted to survive senior year in silence and get out. But even before she reached her locker, she felt the shift, the way conversations slowed, the way glances lingered. Sienna Blake had seen her. Blonde, beautiful, and untouchable, Sienna didn't need to say a word. Her glare was enough. Know your place. But what Sienna didn't know was that Alana had spent years preparing for moments like this, not to fight, but to endure. And if pushed far enough, she wouldn't just endure. She'd show them what power in silence really looks like. From the moment Alana Rivers walked through the doors of Briarwood High, she could feel it, the invisible current of judgment that followed her every step. It wasn't the kind of bullying that screamed in your face. It was more insidious, more refined. The whispers behind her back, the glances that lingered too long, the careful exclusion from conversations. As the only black girl in a mostly white school, Alana had grown used to this kind of attention. But here, at Briarwood, it carried an extra edge, a quiet cruelty sharpened by hierarchy and tradition. At the top of it all was Sienna Blake, a girl who didn't need to lift a finger to dominate a room. Her smirk, her posture, her silence, it was all calculated, and Alana had been marked the moment their eyes met. It started with jokes, casual comments about her hair, her clothes, the way she carried herself. Always loud enough for Alana to hear, never direct enough to be called out. Then came the staged accidents. A spilled drink, a shove in the hallway, her homework mysteriously going missing. And every time, Alana said nothing. She kept her expression still, her steps steady, her voice silent. Because she knew the game. She had seen it played before, and she refused to let them think they had won. What Sienna didn't understand, what none of them understood, was that silence wasn't weakness. It was a choice, a shield. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the room isn't the loudest girl, but the quiet one who refuses to break. Alana wasn't there to fight. But if they kept pushing, they'd eventually learn what her father had always taught her. Real strength doesn't show off. It waits. It didn't take long for Alana to understand how things worked at Briarwood High. The rules weren't written on posters or repeated during morning announcements, but they lived in every sideways glance, every forced smile, every table arrangement in the cafeteria. The students didn't just attend school, they performed for one another, navigating a hierarchy that was as rigid as it was invisible. And at the very top, always watching, always smiling just enough, was Sienna Blake. Sienna didn't need to raise her voice or hurl insults. Her control came through precision. Where she walked, the hallway cleared. When she laughed, others laughed with her, even if they didn't understand the joke. And beside her were her two loyal satellites, Riley Harper, sharp-tongued and observant, and Lena Cho, quiet but calculating, always listening, always remembering what could be used later. Together, they were less a group of friends and more a committee, the unofficial gatekeepers of Briarwood's social order. On her third day, Alana sat alone in the cafeteria, tucked into the farthest corner where the noise thinned and the air felt easier to breathe. She picked at her lunch quietly, hoping to fade into the background. But even in solitude, she could feel eyes on her, watching, measuring. Sienna and her group had taken their usual seat at the center of the room, but their attention drifted toward her like a current. Riley whispered something. Lena stifled a laugh. And then Sienna turned her head just slightly and locked eyes with Alana. It was the kind of glance that didn't need words. It said, "You don't belong here, and we're going to make sure you remember that." Alana held the gaze for one breath, then another, and then she looked away, not out of fear, but out of practice. She had no interest in becoming part of this performance, but deep inside she felt it. The challenge had been issued, not with fists, not with slurs, but with a look, a silence, and 100 watching eyes. At Briarwood High, belonging wasn't given, it was allowed. And Alana Rivers, with her quiet defiance and untouchable calm, had unknowingly disrupted the balance. By the end of the week, the tension that had once whispered around Alana now buzzed with sharp anticipation. Something was coming, everyone could feel it. The looks lingered longer, the whispers grew louder. And in the cafeteria, where social lines were most clearly drawn, the invisible wall between Alana and Sienna's court was beginning to tremble. Friday afternoon, Alana slid her tray onto the same isolated table in the corner. She kept her posture calm, her gaze lowered, pretending not to hear the laughter that rose a little too sharply from the center of the room. She was halfway through her meal when she noticed the shift. The air tightened, conversations faltered. A hush spread across the cafeteria like a ripple in still water. She didn't need to look up to know they were coming. Riley and Lena arrived first, their footsteps light but intentional. They didn't speak, just stared at Alana with twin smirks that said everything. Behind them came Sienna, carrying a styrofoam cup brimming with cranberry juice, her every step practiced like choreography. She paused at the end of Alana's table, eyes narrowing in feigned concern. "Oh," Sienna said with mock sweetness. "You look a little lonely. Why don't you come sit with us? I'm sure you'd love the attention." Riley snorted. Lena laughed. A few students nearby tried to suppress their amusement. Alana looked up, not startled, not angry, just present. Her eyes met Sienna's and held them. No flinch, no words, just stillness. Then, with deliberate carelessness, Sienna tilted her hand. The juice spilled like red ink across Alana's tray, splattering her food, staining the edge of her sweater. The cafeteria erupted in cruel laughter, but Alana didn't move. She stared at the mess for a second, then calmly set down her fork. She rose, picked up the dripping tray, and walked silently to the trash bin. Not a single word left her lips, not a glare, not a tear. She returned, collected her bag, and glanced back at Sienna, not with rage, but something worse, indifference. The room fell quiet. Sienna blinked, her smile faltering. For the first time, her performance had failed. And as Alana walked away, untouched and unbroken, the crowd saw something they hadn't expected: power that didn't need to shout. That night, Alana sat in silence at the small kitchen table, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. The cranberry stain on her sweater had faded to a dull maroon, but the memory of the cafeteria hadn't dulled at all. She replayed it again and again, the laughter, the tray, Sienna's smile, but none of it unsettled her as much as the strange stillness she'd felt while it happened. It wasn't numbness, it was control, the kind her father had spent years teaching her to master. She didn't hear the front door open until the keys hit the counter. Derek Rivers, tall, solid, and steady, stepped into the kitchen. He was still wearing his training jacket from the local martial arts center, sweat clinging to his forehead. But the moment he saw Alana, her quiet posture, her clenched jaw, his face shifted from worn out to concerned. "What happened?" he asked, setting his gym bag aside. Alana hesitated, her eyes fixed on the faint ring her water glass had left on the table. "It was nothing," she said softly. "Just another test I passed." Derek didn't speak. He walked over and sat across from her, folding his hands calmly. Alana sighed. She knew that look. It was the one he wore before a sparring match, focused, grounded, impossible to shake. So she told him everything. About Sienna Blake, the spilled juice, the stares, the silence she chose instead of anger, and the strange reaction it sparked in everyone else. When she finished, Derek nodded slowly, his voice steady but thoughtful. "You didn't react. That's good. But I know it's not easy." "It wasn't," Alana whispered. "It felt like every part of me wanted to push back, just once, to remind them I'm not weak." "But you didn't," Derek said, "because you're not here to prove anything to them. You're here to finish what you started with strength they don't understand." Alana looked up. His eyes, dark and kind, held hers. "Remember what I taught you," he said. "You don't start the fight, but if they bring it to your door, you end it, with clarity, with control, without regret." Alana nodded. In that moment, the noise of the day faded. Her father wasn't just a fighter. He was her anchor. And thanks to him, she knew exactly what kind of strength she carried, the kind that didn't bruise knuckles, but broke patterns. By Monday morning, the storm had shifted, and Sienna Blake could feel it. She walked through the glass doors of Briarwood High with her usual flawless posture, designer bag on her shoulder, and a fresh manicure that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. But something was different. The hallway didn't hum with the same reverence. Conversations didn't quiet in her presence the way they used to. When she passed a group of juniors by the lockers, they didn't even look up. It was subtle, but it was real. And Sienna knew exactly why. Alana Rivers. That girl had said nothing, done nothing, but somehow she had disrupted everything. Her refusal to respond, to cry, to play the role of the victim, had left a crack in the structure Sienna had spent years perfecting. and now that crack was spreading. "She thinks she's clever," Sienna muttered under her breath as she entered second period, sliding into the desk beside Riley Harper. Riley raised an eyebrow. "Alana?" "She's too calm. It's annoying," Sienna said flatly. "She's pretending it doesn't bother her, but it does. I just haven't hit the right nerve yet." Riley didn't answer. Even she had noticed it, the strange power in Alana's silence, the way it made everyone hesitate. But she wouldn't say that out loud, not to Sienna. Later that day in gym class, Sienna decided to push harder. Her brother Jackson, tall and broad-shouldered, stood near the track with Theo Cruz, both of them laughing at something dumb and probably inappropriate. Sienna approached, leaning in close to Jackson. "I need a favor," she said, her voice low but sharp. "What kind of favor?" he asked, already skeptical. "Just a little pressure, during the warm-up run. Walk close, make it uncomfortable." Jackson sighed but nodded. He never said no to his sister, not in public. Alana stood at the far edge of the field, stretching in solitude. Her face was composed, her movements precise, but her eyes scanned the space around her. She could feel it coming, the shift in air, the sudden gravity in every step behind her. Jackson and Theo jogged closer, not touching, not speaking, just closing the gap, testing her edges. But Alana didn't flinch. Her pace never changed, her posture never broke. If they were trying to rattle her, they'd have to try harder. What they didn't realize was that Alana wasn't trying to survive Briarwood anymore. She was studying it, preparing, waiting. By Wednesday, Sienna Blake was done waiting. She had tried everything: snide remarks, social exclusion, silent intimidation. Jackson and Theo had run their little proximity drills on the track, and still, Alana Rivers refused to crack. No tears, no outbursts, not even a sarcastic comeback. Just that maddening calm, like she saw everything and judged none of it worth her time. And the school was watching. Not openly, no one dared say it out loud. But Sienna could feel it in the way heads tilted when Alana walked by, in the quiet that followed her like a ripple through the halls. People weren't laughing anymore. They were wondering. That was dangerous. So she made a decision. If whispers couldn't break Alana, then a spectacle would. The note appeared taped to Alana's locker the next morning, white paper, red marker, just a few lines. "After school, behind the gym, don't be a coward." She didn't need to sign it. Everyone knew who it was from. Alana stared at the note in silence. Around her, students pretended not to watch. Some lingered at their lockers a little longer. Others whispered behind textbook covers, their curiosity impossible to hide. She read the words once, then again, then folded the note neatly and slipped it into her jacket pocket. She didn't flinch. She didn't scoff. She simply turned and walked to class. That afternoon, Sienna strutted through the hallway like a general on her way to battle. Riley and Lena trailed behind her, phones already out. Jackson and Theo walked ahead, clearing the path like bodyguards. Behind them, a quiet crowd began to gather, some curious, others excited, all hungry for drama. Sienna found Alana at her locker, calm as ever. She leaned in close enough for only Alana to hear. "You show up or everyone will know exactly what you are." Alana turned her head slowly, eyes steady, voice low. "I'll be there." Sienna blinked. She hadn't expected that. No hesitation, no fear, just confirmation. And for the first time, it didn't feel like Alana had accepted a challenge. It felt like she had agreed to end it. The sky was overcast by the time the final bell rang, clouds hanging low like they, too, were holding their breath. Behind Briarwood's gym, a quiet crowd had begun to form 20, maybe 30 students, phones in hand, voices hushed with anticipation. This wasn't just another fight, it was a reckoning. Alana arrived without fanfare, dressed in black sneakers and a simple gray hoodie, her hair pulled back. She moved with the same calm she always carried, no performance, no entourage, just purpose. She walked through the crowd like mist, untouched and undistracted, her eyes locking on Sienna, who stood in the center, arms folded, a smirk playing on her lips like she had already won. "Didn't think you'd actually show," Sienna said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Alana didn't answer. Jackson and Theo stepped forward, standing just behind Sienna like bookends of intimidation. Theo cracked his knuckles. Jackson crossed his arms. The crowd inched closer, expecting fireworks. Sienna tilted her head. "Last chance to walk away, Rivers." Alana met her gaze and spoke clearly, calmly. "I warned you. You chose this." The words hung in the air like thunder waiting to break. Without waiting for permission, Jackson stepped forward, intending to end it quickly. His move was swift, one of those football shoves that worked on most guys in his way. But Alana wasn't most people. She pivoted at the last second, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to flip him hard onto the grass. The gasp from the crowd was collective. Jackson groaned, stunned, not hurt, but humiliated. Theo didn't wait. Fueled by ego and impulse, he charged. Alana sidestepped again, fluid and fast, catching his arm mid-swing and locking it behind his back in one clean motion. He dropped to one knee, cursing in pain. She released him without a word. The silence afterward was deafening. All eyes turned to Sienna, who now stood alone. Alana stepped forward, not to attack, but to end it. She didn't raise her fists. She didn't shout. She simply looked Sienna in the eyes and said for everyone to hear, "You were never strong, just loud." Sienna froze. Her mask cracked. And in that moment, everyone saw what Alana had known all along. Power built on fear crumbles when faced with quiet strength. Sienna didn't remember leaving. One moment, she was standing in front of the crowd, her reputation slipping through her fingers like sand. The next, she was storming across campus, heart pounding, hands trembling. The sound of Alana's words, "You were never strong, just loud," echoed in her ears, louder than the cheers she used to command. Her steps were fast, almost frantic. No one followed, not Riley, not Lena, not even Jackson or Theo, who had quietly picked themselves up off the grass without looking her way. No one stopped her. No one said her name. For the first time in 4 years, Sienna Blake was alone. She made it to the empty bathroom at the far end of the building, slammed the stall door shut, and collapsed onto the closed toilet seat. Her reflection in the metal partition stared back flushed, wild-eyed, unfamiliar. The mascara she had so carefully applied that morning now smudged beneath her lashes. What just happened? Sienna had built her power on precision, on reputation, perception, fear. But in a matter of minutes, Alana Rivers had unraveled it all without raising her voice. That was what haunted her most, not that she had lost, but that the loss had come so quietly. Meanwhile, across campus, Alana sat on the back steps of the school's courtyard, her hoodie pulled tight against the wind. She wasn't smiling. She didn't feel victorious, just still. Inside, her heart was steady, like the calm that follows a storm. She had done what needed to be done. No more, no less. Students passed by in 2s and 3s, casting glances her way, some curious, some respectful, all uncertain. No one dared say anything, but the silence around her wasn't hostile anymore. It was something new. It felt like space, like room to breathe. Back in the bathroom, Sienna pulled out her phone, hoping for a message, a defense, some proof that her world hadn't completely collapsed. There was nothing. Just notifications, videos, whispers, screenshots of her downfall already spreading like wildfire. She locked the screen and stared blankly ahead. Alana hadn't humiliated her. She had exposed her. And now, Sienna wasn't sure who she was without the throne she had fought so hard to protect. The next morning, Briarwood High felt different. It wasn't louder or quieter. The bells still rang. The chatter still echoed in the halls. But something beneath the surface had shifted. For the first time in years, the air didn't move around Sienna Blake. It moved around Alana Rivers. Alana walked through the front doors alone, as always. She didn't wear anything different. She didn't change her stride. But students stepped aside now, not out of fear, but out of respect. A few nodded. One girl even smiled. It wasn't the kind of attention that crowned a new queen. It was the kind that recognized someone real. Alana didn't seek it. She didn't even fully accept it. But she noticed the change. The walls that once closed in on her now seemed to widen. People no longer looked through her. They saw her. And more than that, they started to see each other differently too. Sienna, meanwhile, lingered by her locker longer than usual, her fingers hovering over the combination dial like she had forgotten how it worked. The whispers hadn't stopped, but they weren't the same. She could tell when people were looking at her out of pity, not admiration, and she hated that more than anything. Riley and Lena passed her in the hallway. They didn't say a word. They didn't even slow down. For years, Sienna had built an empire out of silence, other people's silence, their fear, their need to belong. But now, the silence around her was hollow, echoing back her own emptiness. She spotted Alana across the hall, speaking briefly to a sophomore who had once been a frequent target of Sienna's comments. Alana listened patiently, then smiled and nodded before moving on. That moment stayed with Sienna longer than she expected. because Alana wasn't replacing her. She wasn't seizing power. She was dismantling the very idea of it. At lunch, Alana sat in her usual corner table. She didn't need a crowd. She didn't need followers. Her calm was still her strength, but now it was also an invitation to be something different, something honest. Sienna stood by the cafeteria doors, watching. Not with jealousy, not yet with understanding, but for the first time, with a question she'd never asked herself before. Who am I, without the fear I used to control everyone else? By the end of the week, Briarwood High had changed, not with a bang, not with a loud declaration, but with something more profound, a quiet shift in how people carried themselves. The hallways felt different now. The invisible tension that once ruled the air, the unspoken social rules that kept students in line, had loosened. There were no dramatic speeches, no assemblies, but the energy had shifted. The fear was gone, or maybe for the first time it was being challenged. Alana Rivers still sat at her usual corner in the cafeteria, still quiet, still alone. But this time her solitude didn't feel like exile. It felt like peace, a choice, not a punishment. She didn't wear a crown. She didn't need one. Across the room, Sienna Blake sat at a half-empty table. Riley and Lena had returned, but the dynamic was different now. They talked, but there was no laughter at someone else's expense. No scheming glances, just silence, sometimes awkward, sometimes honest. Sienna didn't speak much that day, but she watched. She watched as students who once kept their heads down now looked up, as freshmen who used to eat alone were invited into conversations, as the girl she once mocked for wearing thrifted clothes walked past with her head high and a new kind of confidence. And she watched Alana. Near the end of lunch, Alana stood up, picked up her tray, and walked not out but across, straight to Sienna's table. The cafeteria hushed. Sienna looked up, startled. She expected a glare, a smug comment, something. But Alana's voice was even, her gaze steady. "It's over," she said. "Let it be over." No threat, no pride, just clarity, mercy. Sienna said nothing. She couldn't. But in her silence, something inside her began to break, not in anger, but in recognition. For the first time, she saw herself not as the victim of defeat, but as someone being given a chance to change. Alana turned and walked away, and in her absence, she left behind more than silence. She left behind an example of what it looked like to stand firm without cruelty, to win without destroying, to lead without needing to conquer. At Briarwood High, the rules had been rewritten not with violence or vengeance, but with dignity. And it all began with the girl who refused to raise her voice, but changed everything anyway. Life lesson: the strength in stillness. In a world that often rewards volume, dominance, and showmanship, the quiet storm reminds us of a deeper truth. Real strength is quiet, disciplined, and unwavering. Alana Rivers didn't win respect by shouting louder or striking first. She earned it by knowing who she was, standing firm in her values, and refusing to be shaped by cruelty. For older generations who've lived through decades of change, conflict, and personal growth, this story offers something familiar: the understanding that power isn't always about control, but about self-mastery, the ability to respond, not react, to protect without destroying, to choose dignity over dominance. In our lives, whether facing injustice, family conflict, or personal loss, the lesson is the same. We can carry great strength without shouting it. We can end harmful cycles not through revenge, but through restraint and clarity. And we can inspire others not by overpowering them, but by walking through hardship with integrity. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is calm. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. See you in the next one.